Hello everyone. Today we are looking at the process for Solanine's portrait in OC based off of my Baldur's Gate character. While sketching, I used a symmetry ruler down the middle of the face. This only works for characters directly facing the viewer, but it's still very useful. With the lasso tool, I moved some of the features. I like the eyes looking to her left more, and I lowered her nose. You'll see throughout that I struggle with the nose shape a bit, so I'll be going back to it several times. As I started sketching out the braid, I decided I didn't want to deal with figuring it out, so I opted for some cute little puffies instead. With the symmetry layer back on, I moved on to the inking. Once I was happy with my lines, I went through and adjusted the line width. I usually use vector layers in Clip Studio mainly for this feature, as well as the fancy vector eraser that erases lines and intersections. Once my line work is done, I use the Enclose and Fill paint bucket tool, and then drop in all of my flats. I mainly use the peachy acrylic brush, blender, and airbrush throughout the rendering process. I really like the texture it gives the piece. I found this on the Clip Studio store, and I've been using it ever since. Once I get the hair gradient to my liking, I move on to the eyes. Solanine has one normal eye and one eye that is perhaps a window to some demonic power or presence. I haven't quite decided yet. After I finished the face flats, I went in with some pink to create some blushies and realism to the skin tones. I added some blues as well to create some naturally cool toned areas. Once I finish with that, I add in some freckles. I start with a smaller particle and lower opacity airbrush. And then for the more noticeable freckles, I made them bigger with less particles and higher opacity. horns, we have a dark gradient, and then I add some highlights along the ridges and blend those out. I found some scar brushes on the Clip Studio store, so I'm testing those out here. I used the liquefy tool to have the scar follow the form of her face, and then used a soft eraser to blend it out at the edges. After I rendered out the eyes some more, I moved on to shading. I used a dark teal and a multiply layer to add some general shading. My go-to is usually lighting coming from the top right, so hopefully I can branch out in the future to different lighting directions. I use a mixture of the airbrush and the peachy acrylic blender to get the soft shadows I was hoping for, and I use my regular inking pen for the hard shadows. I turned the symmetrical ruler back on to add shadows to the horns, which saved me a lot of time. With the glowy eye, I decided I wanted to veer from the Baldur's Gate character who has a tattoo on the left side of her face, and instead wanted to do smoky wispies. I found a nice smoke brush on the store and used the liquefy tool to bend the pieces to make them look like they were moving towards and away from the viewer. Then I applied a color gradient to the smoke and duplicated the layer. The duplicate layer got a Gaussian blur and was made into an add glow layer. I mess around with the background color a few times before I find something I'm happy with. Zooming in here, it's time to work on the eyes. I was having trouble figuring out the colors. First it was too blue, then it was too green, but I think I landed in a spot I'm happy with. I also added some veins to the eye. I thought it would add a little extra detail to the piece. Because the smoke is glowy, we need pink highlights. So, on an overlay layer, I put down some pink light and blended it out. Since there's now a strong light source coming from the right side of her face, we need shadows cast because of that light. The nose is blocking much of that light, so there will be a hard shadow on her cheekbone. But the other side of the cheekbone will catch some of the light, so we'll blend it out. I go through and I add the rest of the cast shadows. After I get all that blended out, and to my liking, I add some yellow-white highlights from the ambient lighting, which is mainly cast on the top of her head, horns, and shoulders. This layer is a low-opacity soft light layer. At this point, I also use a line recolor auto action, which ended up saving me so much time since I used to do it all by hand. I add in her lashes and give them a pink highlight and blend that out. And then we get to the finishing touches. I add some lens flare materials I have with low opacity on a hard light layer. I was messing around with what I wanted to do for the background until I just decided to add a vignette and use a paper texture. After that, I added a lavender border around her and her name with a nice gradient. And there we have it. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in my next speed draw. Bye bye!